I, Deb Neer, you're right there. You know the difference between dirt and soil, right? Yeah. Dirt is just soil out of place. So anyway, it's an old dirty joke. And Allison has to put up with bad jokes like that all the time with working with me as well. But good afternoon. I'm glad everyone is here this afternoon. And I get to kick off and tell you a little bit about what this series is attempting to do or will do this semester. Allison and Joya and others have put in lots of work to bring in some good speakers. And our kickoff speaker this afternoon is Eric with some really intriguing information around the tying of energy and food. So it's going to be a very, very interesting opportunity to listen to Eric and then others as the season goes on. What is the Food Systems Initiative? The University of Vermont 3.5 years ago decided to have 3 focal areas for work on this campus, and one of them was food systems. And the one thing that really garnered a lot of attention, because this was reviewed by the faculty and by external presidents of other institutions, and it all came around and there was a competition among 7 different possible initiatives, and the food systems was rated #1 because it tied scholarship and teaching as well as what's going on in the state, both from the agency side of things, but from all the farmers in this state and the local farmers markets, and how does the university tie itself more closely to both the state in these areas by bringing our scholarship and our teaching to impact that across the state. So this initiative is like the other 2 initiatives, but we have one component that's very critically and equally important, and that is the outreach component. So we have the research, the teaching, and the outreach. All of these initiatives are transdisciplinary. We're always coming up with new words. You may have heard of multidisciplinary. Well, this is transdisciplinary. And basically what it is trying to get people coming together to solve problems from different perspectives, because the problems, as we all know, are very complex, and the era of just trying to solve them within our own discipline is very, very difficult, and you need to bring people together to interact to help solve those problems. We also promote a community-focused food system. And some folks in the state will use a community-based food system. I often use community-focused because a particular farm or farmer activity may not be based in that community, but may have an impact on that community and may be selected by that community to be part of their food system because of its impact or lack of impact in some other location in the state or the world. We work with partners across the state, Farm to Plate, nonprofits, and others, NOFA. We have a role in developing models and offering learning opportunities to strengthen the state's food system, and that's our land grant mission. The University of Vermont is something called the Land Grant University, and there are 50 of them across the country that were established in 1862 or shortly thereafter. There have been another 50 or so added through the decades for historically black-serving institutions and Native American institutions. But part of that land grant status is you work on problems and you bring your knowledge to solve those problems into the communities. And we see the UVM campus food system as a learning laboratory, and especially as I talk a little bit later about Farm to Plate and the RFP the request for proposal for a new dining service, or the next vendor for the dining service. It may be Sodexo, it may be someone else as we go through this request for proposal system. So it's an opportunity. How can the university use its own dining services, its own campus, to interact with Burlington and other communities to be a model of how we meet our values and how do we move forward as a society in dealing with food and energy and all the things related to ourselves. We're doing this in concert with the Office of Sustainability. And Joya is sitting in the back row there as the head of the Office of Sustainability. And I'm going to read her statement on what that is, because I don't know that as well as the food systems one. But it's to foster sustainable development and promote environmental responsibility at the University of Vermont by strategically bridging the academic activities of teaching, research, and outreach with the operations of the university. So Joya works in concert with the Clean Energy Fund, which is a student-funded organization. There's a $10 fee that all the students pay that go into this Clean Energy Fund, and Joya helps manage that. And between the Office of Sustainability, the Food Systems Initiative, and the Clean Energy Fund, that's what brings all of us together here today and for the seminar series as we go through this spring semester. So in projects that the Clean Energy Fund pursues, they want to recognize and pursue links between food and energy systems in this seminar. And they fund things such as, or look at funding things such as the solar panels at the Miller Farm, supporting student-led research projects to install renewable energy heated greenhouses at Slade and at the University Hort Farm. So the Clean Energy Fund is an undergraduate-driven entity and funding mechanism to make us more energy sustainable. And so the tying of food, which uses a tremendous amount of energy in this country, and in the preparation and storage of it, it's a very apropos combination. So what's going on at UVM? Just two highlights right now. One is the Real Food Challenge. That's made up of students and faculty and staff and Sodexo employees. And that says we should shift our food purchases and our procurement to real food, or at least 20% of it being inventoried as real food by 2020. And what is real food? It's defined as being local, sustainable, fair trade, and humane. And UVM was the 5th institution in the country to sign the Real Food Challenge back in March of 2012. It is a student-led initiative to transform the university dining halls across the country. So it's a working group, as I said, of students, faculty, and staff, and I believe their next meeting is this afternoon at 6 o'clock or 5:30. So if you're interested in that, you might want to drop in and visit. We also have a second item. There's the Sodexo contract is ending its 10-year run in July of 2015. And as part of due diligence, we are putting together a new request for proposal, of which that will be going out into the marketplace for any food service organization that services universities will be able to apply for. And so it's important that as we go through these seminars this spring, if you have thoughts about, you can see a paper up there, if you see thoughts about what you think our food system should be like, or what you like about it currently, or what you would like to see changed, there'll be notes during the question and answer section as well, but if you have an idea that doesn't seem to come up and doesn't seem to fit, feel free to write it down, because we're going to be collecting those, and the seminar will be providing those to the committee, the dining contract committee, that will be putting together the request for proposal. We want that request to show our values and balance costs and its impact on the environment, and so your input today and in future seminars is very, very important. So with that, did I miss any critical components, Allison? If not, then I'll turn it back to Allison to introduce Eric.
Thanks, Doug. So next up we have Eric Garza, and our goal here is to have Eric sort of set the stage for discussions today and for our discussions the rest of the semester, as we understand the interactions between our food and energy systems at the institutional level and at other scales as well. Just as doing some preparation for today's talk and talking to Eric, it's really critical that we understand the complexities of these interactions, because sometimes we're faced with appealing, but what may turn out to be sort of false solutions around synergies, and we end up seeing that can be trade-offs between different efforts in energy and food sustainability. So it's really critical that we understand these issues from an empirical base and the evidence that we can gather from empirical study, and also use that evidence and be guided by our values, like as Doug was mentioning before, as we move forward with decisions at the institutional level. So Eric Garza is a lecturer in the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources here at UVM. He's also the founder and owner of a small consulting company called Aesthetica. Eric holds a PhD in natural resources from UVM, and as well as master's degrees in environmental science and public affairs from Indiana University. and a master's in biology and chemistry from Purdue University. He teaches courses in energy and food systems. This semester, he's teaching complexity in food systems. This past fall, he taught a course called Mapping the UVM Food System, in which UVM students tracked and documented different food purchase and procurement amounts at different dining halls across the campus so that we could have an understanding of what the flow is looking like for different products through campus. During his time as a PhD student at UVM, he was a founding chair of the Clean Energy Fund, which Doug was mentioning, and also served on the Socially Responsible Investing Working Group for a time. He works with a range of partners, studying energy intensity of food production, focusing particularly on local food systems. So I'll turn it over to Eric.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll give another thanks to the Clean Energy Fund and Office of Sustainability for organizing this, and especially to the Clean Energy Fund for making some funds available to bring some innovative speakers in for the rest of the semester. So what I'm going to do with this talk is I'm going to, as Allison said, I'm going to go over some of the data on energy intensity of food systems, particularly at the national level here in the US, but also with some of the energy audits that I've done for small local farms here in Vermont, kind of as a juxtaposition. And the talk that I'm going to give is going to be around 20 minutes or so, and then we'll open everything up for questions, and I hope that we can come up with a pretty lively, informative discussion about some of the facts that I'll put forward. And yeah, I think that'll be a good afternoon. So what I'm going to start with, though, actually is a little bit of audience participation to try to set the stage for kind of one of the reasons why I'm so interested in studying energy use in food systems. So the first question that the big question I want to ask, how many people in the audience have noticed that food prices have been trending upwards? Most people. Not too surprising. And your beliefs are well-founded. This is a graph from International Monetary Fund looking at food price indices. This is actually global data. This is not just US data. And prior to the year 2000, it would bounce around a little bit here and there. But since about 2000, really since about the latter part of 1998, we've seen a pretty steady upward trend in food prices around the world. And not only have we seen a general upward trend, we've also seen a pretty radical increase in the volatility of food prices. And those of you who've been watching the news for the last few years have probably noticed that when you see radical swings in food prices, you oftentimes see food riots around the world. Because here in the United States, we only spend 8 to 10% of our income on food. But in other parts of the world, people might be spending 20%, 30% or more of their income on food. So a swing of food prices that doubles the price of some important commodity like corn or soybeans is going to make a huge, huge impact on the lives of people in other places. So what does this have to do with energy? And the answer is that when you look at an index from the International Monetary Fund of fuel prices, you see the same general trend around the world as you see with food prices. You see a general increase in energy prices after about the year 2000, and the pattern of volatility that we saw in food prices is mimicked by, I shouldn't say mimic, but is similar to the pattern of volatility that we see with energy prices. There's a reason for this relationship, and the reason, and Doug and Allison both kind of alluded to this already, is that producing food in the industrialized food system that we have today, both in the United States, but also around the world, is a very, very energy-intensive endeavor. And when the production of food is such an energy-intensive endeavor, it shouldn't surprise anyone too much when you start seeing the price of food tracking the price of energy, which is a key input into its production process. And I'm not necessarily saying that energy prices are the only thing that matter in determining food prices, because of course they're not. But I'll present some data suggesting further on that they're going to be, we would expect them to be a pretty big portion of that. And one of the ways that I find useful to look at look at the energy intensity of food systems is through an idea called return on investment. Return on investment is something that's used in a wide variety of different circles. Economists use it, people in finance use it. Those of us who study the viability of different sorts of fuels, particularly biofuels, also use it. Return on investment is a very generalizable idea. A lot of it revolves around looking at the output of a production process and just comparing that output to the inputs that are required into that production process to facilitate the production of the output. What we're interested in here is a more specific application of return on investment that is called energy return on investment. Here we're looking at some sort of an energetic output. In this case, the energy value of the food produced by a food system. And we're comparing that to two types of energy inputs. One of these is direct energy. The other is indirect energy. And the easiest way to explain what these two mean is probably with an example. If I have a small farm, and if I were to look at this from a systems perspective and define my systems boundary as the property boundary of that farm, the direct energy represents fuels that are purchased by the farmer and that are burned and used within that system boundary. Whereas the indirect energy represents fuels that are burned in support of that farmer's operation, but are not necessarily burned within that system boundary. So, more practical example, a farmer buys diesel to run his tractor. The diesel fuel would represent direct energy because that diesel fuel is burned on the farm. The energy that is required to manufacture that tractor and to deliver it and to maintain it, most of that energy is used off-site at factories that manufacture the parts, at the place where the tractor is put together. All of that energy is thought of as embodied in that tractor when it crosses the system boundary onto that farm where it's used. So the direct energy is used on-site. Indirect energy is used off-site to produce things that are necessary for that system's operation. So why don't we go ahead and dive right in. So a lot of the, actually, you know what, I'm going to go back and point out one other thing. So with our industrial food system, what we are basically doing is we are taking energy sources that we cannot eat, things like gasoline, diesel, natural gas, a range of different fuels that can generate electricity, and we're turning all of those energy sources into food that we can eat. And there's a calorie value to all those different industrial fuels. There's also a calorie value to food. So with our industrial food system, we are using all these sorts of different processes to take that fossil fuel that we can't eat and that can't nourish us and turn it into something that can. So that's kind of the energetics, kind of a basic energetic understanding of what the food system does. And we can look at the results of that process. We can start with this graph here. What this graph is showing is the number of input kilocalories of energy, mostly fossil fueled energy, that it takes to deliver 1 kilocalorie of food. And the LA there is loss adjusted. So what this does is it doesn't look at total food that's available, it looks at the amount of food that people actually eat. So I'm correcting total food production for the 35 to 45% of the food in the United States that ends up wasted or spoils before anybody actually eats it. So input kilocalories are inputs, the food calories are the outputs. So this is a flipped version of the return on investment equation that I just shown, because in the case of the United States, we put in a lot more kilocalories as inputs than we get back as food. So if I left it as output over input, we'd be dealing with really, really small decimal numbers, which are challenging for people to interpret and relate to. So by flipping it, we can talk in big whole numbers, and it's easier to relate to. So this is U.S. Department of Agriculture data for the year 2002, breaking our food system down into roughly 4 categories. At the bottom, we have producers, agriculture, that uses a little under 2 units of input energy to deliver each calorie of food. The two bluish tinged blocks are thought of as the processing stage of the food system, so food processors and also the packaging stage. And then above them, you have the 3 green shaded areas represent kind of the distribution side of things. So we're looking at freight, which is long distance transport by barge, by airplane, by 18-wheeler. And then at the very top, well, there's freight. Sales represents wholesalers like Black River Produce, people that are distributors of food. And then the retail sales are places like grocery stores, so like the city markets, Hannaford's, Price Choppers. And then the other big chunk of the distribution side is food service enterprises, so restaurants and catering services. And you can see that the distribution side is the largest chunk of this pie so far. And then, of course, at the very top, we have the household side of energy use. And household represents the electricity that's used to power people's refrigerators and freezers, the heat energy used for cooking, and also the energy it takes to drive people to and from restaurants, to and from grocery stores. So the household energy use is a pretty sizable chunk as well. And if people have questions about the particulars of this, we can certainly revisit this later on. Another point that I wanted to make, though, right now we stand in 2002 at around 13 or 14 input calories for every output calorie of food. It's important to realize that the way that the U.S. Department of Agriculture did this study, they actually left a lot of things out. They didn't necessarily count everything in the food system. Some of the things that they left out include the energy that's needed to power wastewater treatment and waste disposal in general, so solid waste, so food waste, as well as all the consumable plastic containers and such that are created from our food system. They didn't analyze that, so that's not in here. They also leave out the governance of the food system. So, the USDA, Food and Drug Administration, Center for Disease Control and Transmission to a degree, all the energy that it takes to make and enforce regulations, to do inspections, all the different extension officers who drive all around, states, supporting different elements of the food system. All of that energy that supports that is not included in here. And then the last piece that they did not include, this is all input-output data, which comes from economic tables published by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. So the analysis that they did stops at the political boundaries of the United States. It does not include the energy that it takes to produce or process food that is made in other countries that is imported into the United States. It also doesn't include the energy used to manufacture equipment, machinery, or other things that are made outside of the United States and then imported in. This draws a boundary at a political boundary. So all the stuff that we import, the embodied energy in that stuff is not counted in this. So usually when people ask me what the total is for the U.S. food system, the best educated guess that I can come up with is that it takes somewhere in the range of probably 15 to 20 kilocalories of energy input to deliver 1 calorie of food that someone actually eats in the U.S. So if we turn that into a return on investment, we're talking about 1 unit of output over 20 units of input. So, a pretty big energy sink as far as that goes, although we're turning energy that we can't eat into energy that we can. And the data that I showed just there was from 2002, as one would probably guess. The energy intensity of the food system is not a static number. It's something that changes over time as a function of our level of development and also the types of strategies that we use to produce food. So this is a graph where I've reconstructed a longer-term time series of data looking at the energy inputs relative to loss-adjusted food outputs of the US food system. And you can see that back around 1910, the input over output was a little over about 1.5. So it was a lot closer to breaking even in terms of the input to output ratio than it is today. And the radical increase stems from a lot of different things, but a couple of the big things that drive this is the fact that we have, on the one hand, largely mechanized our food system. We have replaced human labor, which is fairly energy efficient relative, per unit of work done, with machines, which can do a lot more work more cheaply, but at the same time, they are a lot more energy intensive per unit of work done. The other big thing is that we have come to rely a lot more heavily on foods that are processed and foods that move through commercialized distribution channels, and that adds a lot of energy to the total inputs. What this graph does is it breaks 2002 data from the US Department of Agriculture down as a function of different types of foods. So meat, seafood, poultry, eggs, dairy, fruits and vegetables I had to lump together because of the peculiar way that USDA reports statistics on those, and then grain. And it's important to realize, I guess, first of all, that I don't have all the same categories here as I did in the graph a couple before, because the USDA did not break down energy use in food service sector or in household energy use down by individual types of food. So those are not in this picture, so this is an underestimate of the total. But you can get a sense for general trends based on the types of foods that are used. The other thing to realize here is that that not all food is created equal, effectively. Some foods are more energy intensive on average to produce than others. The other thing that you need to realize is that all of these represent averages. So not every single meat operation is going to necessarily be this energy intensive. Some of them will be much more energy intensive. Some of them will be much less energy intensive. And the same goes with all of these different types of foods. And we'll see that most explicitly when we look at some of the energy audits that I've done. So these are looking at I collect data in a different way rather than looking at distribution versus agriculture, et cetera. I will break down, I do on-farm energy audits by the energy value of labor, the energy value of fuel, which usually includes things like electricity, diesel, gasoline, natural gas, propane, and then the embodied energy of machinery, the embodied energy of buildings, and then the large category of farm inputs, which can include things like pesticides, the embodied energy of pesticides, embodied energy of fertilizers, embodied energy of consumable goods, and a wide range of other things. All kinds of soil amendments are stuck in there. The embodied energy of them gets stuck into there. And so as we look at some of these different types of farms, we had a pasture dairy diversified farm that offers a range of different fruits or a range of different vegetables, as well as some meats and bread. Vegetable CSA, which is certified organic, pastured lamb operation, another vegetable farm, which is certified organic, a pastured meat operation, which does mostly pork, but some beef and a small amount of eggs, and then, of course, a maple sugaring operation. You can see right away that there's a huge array of energy intensities that you can see on these relatively small farms that operate at the local level and distribute their food at a local level, which illustrates the fact that the management style of a farm makes a huge difference in how energy intensive it will be. The kind of products that a farmer decides to produce is going to make a huge difference in what the energy intensity of their farm is going to be. And then the distribution method that they choose is going to make a huge difference in what in the energy intensity of their operation. So some of these do direct marketing. They sell direct to consumers at farmers markets. Some of them do CSAs. Some of them will have wholesale accounts, so they'll deliver to Black River Produce, or they'll deliver to restaurants, or they'll deliver to City Market. So and some of these will do a wide array or multiple of these distribution methods. So, all of those different things factor into how energy intensive this particular operation is going to end up being. Which, the nice thing about that is that because all of those different factors matter, it gives us a lot of leverage if we wanted to, help a small farm become a lot more energy efficient than it is relative to, the food value, the energy value of the food that it produces. We have a lot of wiggle room. And a lot of the small farms that I work with have never necessarily had an energy audit before. So for a lot of these farms, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you can use to help get their energy intensities downwards. And I think at that point, I will open it up to questions. And if anybody has an interest in contacting me regarding any of the work that I've done, I'll have my email address right up there, eric.garza@uvm.edu. So I think Ellison wanted to moderate the Q&A.